Morning, everybody. How we doing today? Today we're going to talk about Eddie Lockjaw Davis. He's a real giant that exists under the radar too much. He's in the lineage of Coleman Hawkins and Ben Webster. A big, bright, bluesy, full, crisp tone, but it's also like very melodic and creamy. It's just a gorgeous center of the road tonality that tells a story every time he plays. And he is a New York native, actually, and so I am finding a few more New York players outside of the piano players, but it's still a very piano player heavy demographic, it does seem, as far as the kind of jazz canon musicians from New York City, born and raised. If you haven't seen my Jazz Journal episode on the great New York piano players, you should check it out on my Patreon page. It's pretty outstanding stuff, I feel. And there's some great contributions from my friend Jean-Michel, my friend Adam Linz. It's a really solid first episode, I believe. It's on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. You'll have access to it. He was born March 2nd, 1922, New York City. He was a self-taught player, so he never had formal education. And these guys almost always tend to lean towards the blues, because blues is a language that once you grasp it, it's easy to talk in and share with people. A lot of these guys, I spent years DJing in the black community, as most of you know. I have hundreds, if not thousands, of friends in that community, and just there's a familiarity I get with some of these guys' facial expressions, personalities, characters. There's just a dynamic in the black community, and white communities and cultures have it too. Like, all cultures have little personality dynamics that you could pick up in how they smile, how they look at you, how they consistently portray themselves. And this is one of the guys I definitely get personality from his photos, and just looking at him smile. His smile is big, it's observant, he's got some humor, you can tell. He's probably a bit of a ladies' man, which most brothers are. He's got this kind of playful nature, it seems like. And he wants to tell you the story. And he, in the 40s, is playing stuff in New York that's kind of R&B-ish. In 46, he's got a band called Eddie Davis's Beboppers. And it includes guys like Fats Navarro, Al Haig, Gene Ramey, and others. He starts playing with cats in the late 40s, like Hootie Williams, Lucky Millinder, Andy Kirk, Eddie Bonamere, the piano player, Louis Armstrong, and then, of course, probably most importantly, Count Basie. And he spends time off and on in Count Basie's group, but his personality fits in this group that is a hodgepodge of personalities. Like Ellington, Basie's group has all these dynamic players and personalities and egos, and part of being in a swing band is, okay, I see what you did, horn section, now watch what these saxes are going to do. Oh, okay, watch the trombones. Like, there's a friendly competitive nature within the context of those groups that demand a certain personality to really excel and be noticed. Pretty easy to be on the bench if you can't be playful as a Harlem Globetrotter. If you in Basie's group, you better got some shine to you, you know? And there's just something about this guy's personality that I've always loved. And I've been told by Jean-Michel and by other people as well that he was actually kind of a private nature. And my take on that is he's going to be willing to joke with you, nickname you, be playful, but you ain't going to get to read his book. See what I'm saying? We'll talk all kinds of stuff about you and your story and your sex life and what you've been up to and who you've been, but I'm a closed book. You don't need to know who I went home with last night. You don't need to know who I get my stuff from. You don't need to know nothing about what I do personally. And yet, on top of that, he's got this kind of bubbly nature that has this kind of wry, slinky, playful attitude. And I think it comes across in his playing a lot. And that's the part of jazz that's, for a lot of people, I think missing, is how much people, their personalities and their facial expressions are coming across as well in their playing and their emoting and how they handle their place in this world. And so Eddie Davis, Lockjaw, is a cat that I think I would enjoy spending time with and asking questions and probing and hearing what he had to say, and like Duke Ellington, probably never answering a question directly. Watching Ellington being interviewed and diverting answers with other questions. You know, it's godlike. God chooses not to answer that question. He's going to actually return it with a question of his own to make you think about the question you just asked. Ellington's diversions to me are so clever. In some ways, they're humble. And I get some of that same from Lockjaw. He just seems... He's clever. He's going to outsmart you. He's got enough dirt on you from you talking too much that he'll burn you if he has to in a playful way. But you don't know his laundry. He's too smart for that. And I think that's just... I know that guy. I know like a dozen guys like that in my community, in the community, that were super playful and knew the dirt on you, but you had no clue about any of their private personal business. You know what I mean? And it wasn't none of your business to even ask, and they made that clear. And I think all that's a big part of his playing. Playful. Wry. Willing to expose you and clown you to some degree. I think when he's playing with Griffin later in his career, Griffin's kind of more bebop, fast-paced complexity versus Lockjaw's kind of loose, bluesy, tongue-in-cheek innuendos. At one point, it was said by, I believe, Lockjaw, that him and Griffin, it's not a contest, it's a contrast. When we play together, it's not two guys who sound the same at all. And we're not really competing. We're just illustrating how different this instrument can sound. And a lot of that is strictly driven by the cat who's emoting into that instrument. So he joins Basie, I think, for the first time in probably early 50s. And it's a band full of characters. And he's in and out of Basie's group over the next 20 years. And it seems like if you had a chair in Basie's group, it was always a chair you could have a seat back in again if and when you needed to. And that's part of the wonder of what this guy was about. He starts recording as a solo musician fairly early on. You know, this, what we're listening to, is a 10-inch on the Roost label, probably from 53, maybe 422, maybe 54. And there's only about 2 dozen Roost 10 inches before they move on to the 12-inch era. And he's already got that light, spry, playful, dancing gazelles in the meadow kind of dynamic to his playing. He hasn't got the Lockjaw term yet. There's some debate as to where the name Lockjaw comes from. Some claim it was from him naming songs in the studio session one day, and the name Lockjaw ended up becoming his nickname. Others say it was just from how he kind of clenched the horn and how it was kind of all business. Any good nickname should have several theories. You know what I mean? If it's too clear, it's probably ain't a great name. And the black community is so renowned for great nicknames. It's just something that it's a form of shit talk in a way. You know, how a great cartoonist can emphasize and characterize some of your traits and exaggerate them. A great nickname is often doing that same thing. You don't get the name Tiny by being small. Like it's always kind of part admiration, part diss with a nickname, and that's part of the joy of it. I feel joy in my heart just listening to Lockjaw. You know, it's just a wonderful spirit. Again, it's a guy that I think I would enjoy sitting and spending time with. And I think that's an important aspect of the music. You know, how much. This is a set on Roos 2227 featuring Shirley Scott. And there might be a couple of the same tracks here. I'm not going to look. But that's Shirley Davis on the no, it seems like they're different tracks. That's Shirley Scott, sorry, on the organ, who is one of the great women in jazz of a super long career, 40, 50 albums as a leader, as a woman. And most of the other great females in jazz, for all their prowess, don't get a lot of recessions, especially as a leader. Show me the great Mary Lou Williams discography. Show me Melba Liston's discography, you know? And then you look at Shirley Scott, Prestige, Impulse, these labels put out kind of a non-stop barrage of her version of soul jazz. And I think that's partly too because the organ had come into prominence in the 60s and she was successful. And success never hurts you in the music business. But again, it comes down to this guy's big tone, his bluesy expressions, his kind of aggressive playfulness, and then his sensitivity when he's playing mid-tempo and ballads. And it's all just this package that I honestly feel most jazz fans would love and enjoy all his records if you factor in what I'm saying here. It's not necessarily the bristle of Lee Morgan. It's not necessarily the jazz lab in composition of Donald Byrd. It's not the fire of Freddie Hubbard. You know, it's not, it's more just the center of the blues. And it's always going to be enjoyable, and his records are very affordable. He's from a little bit too early of an era for the Blue Note hard boppers to really love, because they're too cool. And he doesn't play fucking car alarm. He doesn't play enough on the edge for most of the avant-gardists to appreciate him. So he ends up being in kind of a never land between bebop and soul jazz. And he touches on hard bop in some sessions. And he certainly does the soul jazz, the Texas tenor sound, almost effortlessly, but that stuff's so rooted in the blues and gospel, how could he not? And his stuff at Prestige is going to definitely be part of that whole Gene Ammons, Willis Jackson dynamic of Shirley Scott, of jazz that's going to be fun to listen to. And jazz that black people are still buying. You know, it's very accessible. It's very still swinging. Like I say, he joins Basie, and he works with Basie a long time. I'm going to show you some of the highlights. This record is one of the highlights of Basie's career, and it's got a great band on it. And tracks like After Supper are great showcases for the young Mr. Eddie Davis. This is a great record. It showcases a lot of fire and explosiveness. This is the track Flight of the Foobirds And there's some fun Eddie Davis on this track. That's a great record. It should be in everyone's collection. He does some of the stuff with Basie on Verve, like Basie's Beat, Basie's Beetle Bag. This was originally on the Dot label, Straight Ahead. And the Dot label is a label that's kind of a smaller label between the cracks. That's got some interesting stuff and basically has a few things there. This is Pop Goes the Basie on the Reprise label. And Reprise doesn't come into the picture until like 1960 or so, my understanding. And they don't have a lot of jazz. They dabble with Ellington. They dabble with a little Basie. Of course, Sinatra's tour de force at Reprise. And then they kind of get into rock and Neil Young and all of that whole spiel and move away from jazz pretty much entirely. So I don't really think of Reprise as a jazz label. They have a few things that are noteworthy. This is on the Brunswick label. Brunswick, of course, is a suburb of Newark, New Jersey. And it's a bit like the Savoy label and some awful artwork. Thanks, Count. I'll be putting a bag with a rope around my neck. It's still a fun session, and I don't think they meant to be offensive. You know, record labels were putting Blind Stevie Wonder in boxes and you know, signed, sealed, and delivered. I'm gonna mail this kid to you. You know, it's a pretty not a lot of respect for the black musician in the industry. After his early work at Roost, he moves to the King label, and this is going to be 56, 57, 58. He does 5 or 6 records. I only have a couple of them. This is early stuff here. You can see how dashing a young man he was. That smile is just electric. He owns you with that smile. And I would guess that he had a nice collection of ladies' female adornments thrown at him, because he certainly has that debonair, I'm not going to work hard to talk to you. I'm just going to smile and let you know with that smile how fucking money I am. And let's remember something. In the black community, sex is almost a currency in the state of limited freedom, limited economic opportunity. Sex was a luxury that was always affordable and allowed you to kind of live like royalty if you had control of that dynamic. And it's the sexual freedom and liberty of the black male that drives so much of the white, insecure, impotent rage against the black male. And let's be clear about that. Racism in this country isn't driven by the black community. Hate crimes aren't blacks committing crimes against whites as retribution for hundreds of years of oppression. Hate crimes are angry little white dudes doing things unspeakable to black males. And we all know, any homicide detective, any prison warden can tell you, you go to jail for crimes of passion, sex, and financial, economic, money crimes. And there's not a lot of white jealousy of black economic situations. Maybe Miles Davis, you know, with his little Porsche, and, you know, some of the boxers that were flaunting their money. But for the most part, blacks don't walk around flaunting their money on their chest. And I don't think a lot of hate crimes have happened because a white guy was like, fuck you, N-word, you got too much currency in your pockets. It was always the sexual liberty, the sexual confidence that an impotent, repressed, sexually uncomfortable white male feels rage, especially if I know that I'm not functioning well and my wife and daughter in the room, and you walk in maybe not even looking at my women, but this is my meadow, these are my does, I got small antlers, but I got to challenge you. And the bigger black male might not even be looking at you. He's like, my antlers are too big to even look at you or your does. I got other things on my mind, so I'm not going to fight over it. I can pick what I want in this meadow. This bar's full of women. Yet when he goes out to have a cigarette, the white guy sneaks up behind him and hits him with a baseball bat because that fury, the jealousy of the black confidence sexually. But the black experience was one, that sexuality was the one thing that you can't really take this from me short of castrating, which was done awfully. You know, and black men were hung for crimes of sexual passion, innuendo, looking at the daughter the wrong way. It's always been a part of the legacy of slavery throughout the entire history of it. The fear of what are you going to do to my women is always haunted the white male. And when you move into my white neighborhood, I'm not scared of you really taking my barbecue. I'm scared of your son looking at my daughter. And I don't want my daughter walking around boasting about how great the sex she has with Tyrone when I can't even zip up mom at night because I'm so weak. And the sexual oppression of the white male isn't a white thing. It's the conservative approach of our religious controlled upbringing. Our white Anglo-Saxon backgrounds are very sexually repressed. It's a form of control. It's a way to keep us from being happy. Because I got happiness to sell you. I'm trying to sell you my ticket to heaven. And without this happiness, you can't be happy. And we don't have that natural happiness. And so we stay towing in the line, trying to get our way into heaven. And meanwhile, it creates a deviance and a distortion of our sexuality. And it creates a lot of misfunction and deviance and impotence. And it's something I talked about in depth in an episode last, probably fall. Probably last fall. Probably episode number 60 in there somewhere. But it's a lot of what drives jazz, is the allure of the sexuality of these black males. The white females are always entranced by that sexuality and are lured in by the groove and the enticement of jazz. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we always recognize jazz needs to swing. It just has to. It's a sexually lurid music born in brothels, born in houses of ill repute for the industries of sin. You know, vice and jazz, as I've spoken about in certain episodes, are very interwoven. Black sexuality is a very powerful thing, and it's a source of joy, freedom, happiness that was not, you weren't really able to take that from them. And so they expressed their joy through a confidence sexually and lack of guilt and shame. It's just part of the function of their community. And it's not across the board. You know, there's blacks raised in a very conservative environment that probably are repressed. And there's whites out there that are swinging like Hugh Hefner. You know, but as a general rule, you show me an angry white guy with a hood and a stake, and I'll show you a guy who can't get his tool bits to function. You know what I mean? That drill bit ain't sinking a lot of wood. Eddie Davis, though, has that smile, that wry kind of personality that says, I got this, females. Who's game? Who wants to play with daddy tonight? This is a record that Bethlehem reissues, which you might think is confounding, because he's not really a Bethlehem recording artist. But if you know my Bethlehem history, which I've talked about, Bethlehem was bought by the King label. And so when King took possession of Bethlehem, it gave them a chance to reissue some of their titles from the late 50s that weren't really King sounding, because King was more R&B, you know, and they reissued some of their stuff on the Bethlehem imprint, which is what a lot of the 6,000 series past about 6035 or so, a lot of that stuff starts becoming stuff that King recorded, but they're reissuing on the Bethlehem imprint with the Bethlehem logos, and it can be confusing. There's some great titles in there, you know, and some of those fantastic titles like the Zoot Sims, the Pepper Adams, Donald Byrd, names that people are going to be familiar with, but don't really fit in with the Bethlehem house of musicians. And it's because there's a whole different thing going on at Bethlehem once King kind of takes over. But this is really a King session from '57 with Shirley Scott. Great stuff. Which moves us to his time at Prestige. And this is an amazing, long discography. He comes to Prestige, and almost immediately, him and Shirley Scott, who he worked with at Roost, hit it off, and they start doing these Eddie Davis, Lockjaw cookbooks. And these cookbook records are drenched in the blues. And in some ways, this, along with some of the Gene Ammons stuff, is the formula that Bob Weinstock and Prestige moved forward with past 1962, 61, 63. And anything that becomes kind of newish with any kind of edge to it was going to be on new jazz. And 7141, that's right about the time where the Prestige 7000 series shifts dramatically into the sounds of soul jazz, organ jazz, guitar, rhythmic, R&B, crossover, accessibility. These records sold well. They were partied to. They're beat up because they were played a lot. And so Prestige early before 7150 is a lot different than Prestige after 7150. And what's great about the stuff after 7150 is you can get great old pressings, old titles from probably 1960, 61. Doesn't say in any kind of convenient way, but it could even be as late as 59. It's probably 60. And these titles don't cost you an arm and a leg. You can get Eddie Davis records for as little as $10. And you won't really ever have to pay more than $30, $40 for a Lockjaw record. And I think that's a little misleading, because I think so many collectors measure the worth of a player by how much their records cost. And I think so many of these collectors think that if their records cost a lot, it's got to be great. And it's really not a reflection of ability, innovation, as much as it is a reflection of how well did it sell. Jimmy Smith and the Three Sounds records aren't super expensive, not because they're not great, but because those records sold well enough that there's still enough copies out there that I can't put this on eBay for $800 because there's a bunch out there for $30. So you gotta stay within the realm of all the other sellers selling those copies that are still available. It's why they don't get reissued. There's enough catalog out there available on Discogs, on eBay, on Amazon, and Eddie Lockjaw Davis is one of those guys. His records sold pretty well. They're still pretty available. The average collector doesn't think it's hip enough for him to bother. Oh, it's only $12. I'd rather have a $600 Hank Mobley record. And yet, if you take Soul Station and compare it to a lot of Lockjaw, they're not that far apart whatsoever. And Mobley could be pushed out to the outer realms. That almost always was an indication of who he was playing with. You know, Mobley could be pushed out by playing with Morgan, or Hubbard, or McLean, or Sonny Clark, or whoever. But Mobley himself was pretty centered in the blues and not so different personality-wise from Lockjaw. You know, yet Mobley's Blue Notes sell for hundreds of dollars, thousands even, and Lockjaws rarely reach $50, $60. And they just sold well. They're great blues drenched, full of soul, full of integrity. This isn't me being carefree and not thinking about my playing. This is me playing this as honestly from my heart and my soul as I can. That's the thing about the blues. That's the thing about jamming and head arrangement. This stuff, it's going to be so... It's going to be so genuine. Music, when I don't have to think, as I've said before, is as real as it gets. thinking is not part of the jazz equation. And if I got to think too much, something's wrong with that formula. And thinking actually distracts from feeling. So that was the Cookbook Volume 2. Jerome Richardson, Shirley Scott. we listened to a bit of the Jaws record, which is outstanding. Shirley Scott, 71-54, 71-61. This is very saxy. Betty Lockjaw Davis, Buddy Tate, Coleman Hawkins, and Arnett Cobb. 4 great tenor players, kind of just blowing the blues, telling stories. And you can guarantee that these 4 dudes, as much as they try to cut each other, they also trying to tell the best sex story. Oh yeah? Well, the girl I was with last night, woo, let me tell you. That's the nature of the blues. And as much as the music is a balm, a medication, a soothing aid to the pain of this life, sex is always that cherry on top. Let's not be confused about that. Sex alleviates the blues just like the music does. And it's very interwoven into the fabric. I'm not probably going to drive home to my mansion in Connecticut. My silver spoon collection hasn't been polished this evening. Darling, where's the help? They're not celebrating that. You know, they might get a Cadillac, but they probably still live in a row house, just like Louis Armstrong did in Queens. They don't move into that castle in the sky. You know, the Jeffersons moved on up. They moved up into an apartment that most of us wouldn't find too deluxe, as it were. So again, the sexual braggery, bravado, is interwoven into the fabric of the blues. And the avant-garde, that sexuality is kind of stripped away. It's a cerebral thing. It's a spiritual thing. It's no longer just the fun expression of brothers talking about last night's conquest. I could go on forever about Eddie's Prestige stuff and the joy in his playing, and we'd be here all day because all these records have merit. A lot of it's live, and to me, live jazz is always going to be the best because it's so off the cuff. It's so without hindrance of a producer's judging eye. I bet playing for Creed Taylor sometimes over an Impulse sucked, or at Verve sucked. You know, as much as I respect what Creed Taylor did for this music, it was probably a lot of work and drained some of these exercises' joy. Herman Lubinsky at Savoy probably wasn't very fun to play for. Full letter chest. Probably because they were dicks. You know, when you're recording a live session somewhere at a club and you know Prestige is going to put it out as is, you ain't thinking about nothing but, oh goddamn, she's fine, look at the curves on that one. You know what I mean? It's so lucid from the hip. This is Bacalao, again with Shirley Scott. And those two do a lot together. And then she eventually starts working with Stanley Turrentine, who was kind of a successor of the Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins, Eddie Lockjaw Davis, Stanley Turrentine. He's kind of that next generation of soul, edges of bebop player. This is a fantastic record. I've referred to this one numerous times. This is with Johnny Griffin, recorded at Minton's Playhouse up in Harlem. Two of the greats of this music. And Griffin was a little short guy. Locke was kind of a taller guy. Both playful. He was a mischievous guy. He was kind of secretive, but he had dirt on you. There's a great electricity between these two players. And like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't a contest. It was about the contrast, which is interesting. It's recognizing that, yeah, we got different approaches to these horns. And so we're not going to really try to outdo what you do. And you're not going to try to outdo what I do. we're actually going to let these two sounds dovetail and become something new. And I'm going to jump through the rest of his Prestige stuff here at this point, because we're already at the 35 minute mark. This is actually an original pressing of that. That one was a kind of a newer, nice reissue. But I found this original pressing promo, not for sale, and the guy only wanted like $10 for it. I'm like, yep, that's me. Plays perfectly. Train whistle, which I talked about the other day, and my Eric Dolphy's on this. But it's a big band arrangement. It's not a typical Lockjaw session because it's just so much bigger, so much more range. Oliver Nelson's presence and Ernie Wilkins' arrangements as well. So it's not as loose as most Lockjaw stuff. Here's the Cookbook Volume 3 with Shirley Scott. There's that. Look at that look. You know, she had to have a pretty nice ass to get him to look away from the camera for that shot. He's looking straight forward, shot for shot. And then, oh shit. You know what I mean? Not much can pull your eye away like that. Going to the meeting, Eddie Lockjaw Davis, we're at 72-42. And Prestige's catalog at this point is dominated by Willis Jackson, Gene Ammons, soul cats like this, Ornette Cobb, Shirley Scott. This is with the Paul Wheaton Trio, I Only Have Eyes for You, Eddie Lockjaw Davis, number 7261. So about every 10-15 releases, Prestige is putting out a Lockjaw record. 7271, Eddie Lockjaw Davis tracking. Battle Stations, Eddie Lockjaw Davis and Johnny Griffin. And so the Griffin Lockjaw thing starts here at Prestige. Then they move to Riverside and do some great titles there. More with Shirley Scott, Smokin', 7301. Eddie Lockjaw Davis and Johnny Griffin, first set, recorded live at Minton, 7309. I enjoy collecting these records. You know, you can go on Discogs and find most of them for very affordable prices. This is Lockjaw Griffin Jr. Man's The Midnight Show live at Minton's Playhouse. The Late Show, which is also from Minton's Playhouse with Griffin. And then he does a couple of Moodsville things here. Moodsville 4, Eddie Lockjaw Davis with Shirley Scott. Great stuff, kind of ballads and mid-tempo stuff. And then Eddie Lockjaw Davis with Shirley Scott. This one's called Misty. And these are both awesome, chill out. Champagne by the fire, darling. Shall we? Pass me the caviar. We have no crumpets? Oh no. The pomposity of the stereotypical white jazz fan, to me, deserves a little mockery at times. Because so often, that pomposity comes with a complete disregard of the sacrifice and the struggle that made this music. And if you can listen to a great art like this and have no comprehension of what birthed it, what sourced it, and to you it's just novelist, darling, pass me the champagne, you're kind of dumb. That's as nice as I can say that. Disconnected, maybe, is a better word. And believe me, you know, you can be the ruling white class, and it's not about white, you can be the ruling class and not really recognize the struggle of the lower classes because you're sheltered from it. And your media is run by your contemporaries, your elite, and so they're not going to really inform you that in order for you to have this comfortable, pompous lifestyle, we got to bleed a bunch of other motherfuckers from the throat. It's not something most people want to be reminded every day. But yeah, I'm eating really well, but many people had to starve for me to eat that way. They don't really inform you of that. And so the people who have this kind of pompous connection with jazz, and they hear it in the art gallery, and they want to take home that music. What is this music? Oh, it's great. Who you say it is? Miles Davis. Darling, we must have some Miles Davis on our Pandora. You know, they don't get it. They don't dig into it. It just feels like they're part of an elite social strata. And in order for my opera gloves to fit snug, I must have this music with my trumpet. This is Lockjaw Afro Jazz. This is on now, he's on Riverside here. And even after he goes to Riverside, a lot of that prestige stuff was in the vaults and was coming out after he moved over to Riverside. So there's going to be some crossover here in terms of years. But that's how this works with jazz. We're going to record you a lot, put out some to most of it, sometimes less of it, and then if and when you leave, and especially if you become even more popular somewhere else, we're going to be able to keep issuing the stuff that we own that we haven't issued. This is Afro Jazz on Riverside. It's a bit of a different session with Clark Terry, Ernie Royal, John Bello, Lloyd Mayers, Ray Barretto. Recorded in '61 in New York. You don't hear the kind of Latin Afro thing a lot from Lockjaw, but it's a fun record. It's actually the only record I think that he does on the Riverside. I think there's one more, because the rest are on Jazz Line. Yeah, this one here is with Sweets Edison. It's called Candy Jawbreakers, and I used to chew Jawbreakers when I was a kid. Kind of nasty now when I think about it. Sweets Edison's one of the great trumpet players of all time, and a lot of his muted playing, a lot of his melodic center informs guys like Art Farmer and Miles Davis a lot. Chet Baker. I love Harry Sweets Edison. My friend Jean-Michel was good friends with him. Apparently he's one of the great guys. But that's kind of what happens in the black community is laced with people who are great guys. You know, struggle burns humility. Knowing even that how much the rest of your family, community, town is still struggling prevents you from being too arrogant. You know, if I got too much money to flaunt, I maybe should send some of that money home. So he makes a great string of records here at the Jazzland label, which is Riverside's sister label. And this is not one. Again, he's done a lot of stuff with Griffin already over at Prestige, but here's Johnny Griffin, Lockjaw Davis Quintet, Tough Tenors. And this quintet that they had was together 61, 62, I believe. I think I wrote it down. Yeah, 60, 62. And looking at Monk. Griffin Lockjaw, Griffin Lock. Jazzland 60, Blues Up and Down. Jazzland 76, Tough Tenor Favorites. So it's a pretty comprehensive body of work that Griffin Lockjaw do together. And Griffin Lockjaw become one of the great tenor duos. You know, you got Zut and Alcone. You have Sonny Stitt and Gene Ammons that played together on some great battle records. And Griffin Lock. These two make some of the most fun, celebratory, joyous records in the history of this music. My friend Jean-Michel, I think, actually gave me this record. And it's on the Black Lion label, I believe, out of the United Kingdom. It was probably recorded in Europe. I'm not even sure about that. It's a beautiful record. And for my money, jazz players that come around in the late 60s, early 70s are a bit snooze for me. But to listen to these guys from the 40s and 50s play in the 70s and 80s, boy, Grandpa can tell you some stories. Nobody knows the troubles I've seen. Nobody knows what the Lord Jesus. Can I get an amen? It's gospel drenched. Wild Bill Davis on the organ, Billy Butler on the guitar, Oliver Jackson's on the drums. Recorded in 1976 at the Barclay Studio, which has to be in London, doesn't it? It sure does. Actually, it looks like it's a French label because the French came first there. Yeah, it's French. Listen to that tone. And so I've really come to realize that these greats recorded wonderful blues-drenched, honest stuff into their late years. And I'll buy more older Lockjaw when I have a chance, when I come across it. But he's also on a smattering of side projects as well. Not a lot. His Basie work is probably his biggest body of work outside of his own career. But some of the sessions he gets selected for are right in this vein. Arnett Cobb with Eddie Lockjaw, 7151. So it's right in the heart of his prestige years. This is Moodsville Red Garland Volume 1. The first Moodsville record is the Red Garland Trio with the fantastic Lockjaw Davis. And if you want a record to wake up to in the morning and start your day with some coffee clearing cobwebs, this record will ease you in to your newspaper and to your trip to the bus route. Nighthawk is another Swingville record with Coleman Hawkins and Lockjaw Davis. A guy who he definitely owes a bit of a tribute to is Coleman Hawkins via Ben Webster. This Tiny Grimes record seems to be coming up quite a lot lately, in part because of the Sidemen. I love Tiny. He's a great guitar player. Eddie Lockjaw, we just did a Ray Bryan episode, so we've seen this record quite a lot. It's outstanding, 7144. But you see there's kind of a blues, melancholy. Oh, this session, we need one more guy. Let's get Lockjaw for this. This is Lockjaw's wheelhouse. And the one record here that's kind of an outlier is the Golden Boy record by Quincy Jones. On the Mercury label, probably 1962. I wonder if it says. 64. It's, Quincy's arrangements are going to be pretty big and bright, generally speaking. And I don't remember this being any exception. That's Quincy right there to a T. So that's a bit of a different sound for him to be a part of, but still Quincy's obviously one of the up-and-coming guys in jazz, going back to pretty much his showing up on the scene. Quincy's making inroads and impacts as not so much as a player, even though he was a fine trumpet player. He makes his impact as an arranger and as a guy who was bringing in fresh innovation and ideas to arrangement and composition. He dies in 1964 of lymphoma cancer in Culver City, California. And he does play with the Kenny Clark, Francie Bolon group with a bunch of European guys as well for a while in the mid-60s. It's just one of the great legacies of jazz. His body of work is immense. And here's another thing that's kind of shocking. I don't know if I've ever Wikipedia'd a guy before to get some dates and some little tidbits for you. And the guy had such a big body of work, and his bio was so short. Usually when a guy's bio is that small, it's Herbie Nichols. He's got 4 records and a few people know about him. This guy was on the scene forever, played with a lot of the greats in this music. Never really tried to drive innovation as much as just play the blues. One of the great tones that's ever played this horn. And yet, not enough people are contributing to his Wikipedia page to grow it, to make it to be insightful and deep. It was a short little blurb, and it was this much discography, this much biography, and usually it's that much biography, a little bit of discography, and it's out of whack. So I challenge people out there, if you're looking for something new and fresh to dig into, Eddie Lockjaw Davis. He's going to be a great morning for you to sit and enjoy the world that you live in. And he will make you value it. He's just truly one of the greats. My name is Dan. Please check out my Patreon page if you have the time and can donate a few bucks. It would be appreciated. Every dollar helps. I want to keep this channel going. Again, everyone, be blessed, be safe. Talk to you soon. Peace.